Hey everybody, Danny Ward here. Thanks for joining us. This week we're talking short game and I bring you to the 17th here at Canterbury. You've just missed the green. You've got a basic shot and you'll duff it in front of your nose, or you thin it over the back of the green. It is so frustrating, isn't it? So how do you play simple shots like this, but also how do you play more difficult shots? What club should we be using? How do you get rid of some of that anxiety, some of that tension? That is what I'm going to cover in this week's training. I love the short game, but I know it's so frustrating. So that's what we're going to cover. Before I do though, look, if you're new to the channel and this is one of your first videos of mine, please consider subscribing. Press that little bell button and next subscribe button, you get notified every time I release a video just like this one. Plus, there's a free practice guide. So if you do enjoy this video and you want to you don't have to remember a thing, just go into the description box below, download the free practice plan so you can take it out onto the practice ground. Hope you enjoy. Great, so let's get stuck into the basic stuff first and then we'll start to make it more advanced as the video goes on. I've got something really quite cool to share with you a little bit later. So, chipping. We're going to start with the big aha moment. Certainly for me over the last say 5-6 years, focusing on improving your ground contact, not during contact with the golf ball. Yes, you heard that right. We're going to focus on how we connect the club with the ground first, not the golf ball. So I was always taught, I don't read the same, I was always taught to focus on improving my contact with the ball. So what I would do is I'd get my hands, the ball fairly back in my stance, I'd get my hands angled forward here, and I'd try and hit the ball. I'd really try and improve that contact. And do you know what? It works. So many good players still use that, but it requires a lot of precision. It means that you have to hit the ball perfectly. So I've got a 52-degree wedge here. I've got the ball back in my stance. I've got my hands forward and I'm going to try and hit the ball first. And look, it works. I can do that, right? Almost holds it. So it works and there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is I don't know about you, but I'd like to have a technique that is more forgiving, is more, if I'm nervous or I've got that anxiety that, I sometimes get, some of my students get, I want to be able to kind of cope with that. So now what we're doing is we're not focusing on striking the ball, we're actually trying to focus on how we interact the golf club with the ground itself. Now, what we're trying to do here is we want to try and get the bounce, the flat bit of the golf club, gliding through the ground, as opposed to when the ball was back and the hands are forward, this flat bit here, look, is off the ground and we're striking it like this. Now the problem is, when that flat bit's off the ground, we have this kind of, I call it a butter knife or knife. If that strikes the ground now behind the golf ball, you will fat it. And that is when you leave that ball, look, well, I didn't hit it there. Look at that, I couldn't even hit the golf ball because the leading edge gets stuck in the ground. Now watch the difference here. I can catch this ball fat now, but use the ground. I caught that probably an inch behind, and look at that. A bad shot, i.e. a fat shot using the base of the club will create more consistent shots for you than if you have this angle, right? So what I'm going to do now is show you exactly how you can start to set yourself up for this so you can make it happen actually out on the course. So the first stage in this process is you have to change your mindset. Most of you, certainly I was at one stage and many of my students were, most of you are focused on trying to improve your ball contact when you stir over there. This will have an impact on therefore your action. If you're trying to hit that ball first, you're trying to focus on improving your contact, you may chop down on the ball, you may have your hands way too far ahead here, getting that chopping action. You may be trying to lift the ball up in the air, because again, it's the ball, all the ball, trying to lift or scoop the ball up in the air. But if you change that for a second and look at chipping as all about ground contact, then all we're going to do is this. I want you to grab a wedge. If you've got a wedge close to hand, just grab a wedge and just feel the bottom part of the club, the flat bit, okay? And what I want you to do is this flat bit, we're simply just going to place, look, on the ground. When we place it on the ground, you'll notice the shaft, as you look at it here, is quite vertical, slightly angled forward, but slight vertical. This is the position we want the club to return to when it strikes the ground, okay? Now, I might strike the ball first, I might strike the ground a little bit behind the ball. The great thing about this is the margin of error is massive. So that's the intention. We're going to strike the ground, we're going to get the shaft returning to this position here, and we're going to make a few swings just for now, just see if you can feel that flat bit hitting the ground or bruising the ground. Then what I want you to do is I want you to then angle the club way forward, completely opposite, so you can feel the opposite. Feel how the leading edge gets stuck into the ground. So you've now got a bit of contrast, a bit of feeling of what's wrong and then what's right. Do that a couple of times so you can get a sense of how your club is interacting. If you get too flicky, like this, you can get away with it sometimes, but the difference is you'll only be hitting this bit of the golf club here. So just play around with just interacting the base or the bounce with that turf. Let's have a look at this in action. So we'll go to the setup in a second. So I've got myself set. And nice and easy. No mark, just bruising that turf comfortably. You can see here there's no divot in any shape or form. I'm not sticking it into the ground. So in terms of setup, how do we make this a little bit more accurate and more consistent? Well, nice and simple. Your ball position can change depending on flight. We won't go into that too much yet, so we're going to keep it nice and central. Basically, if you move the ball forward, the ball goes a bit higher. If you move the ball back, the ball goes a bit lower. But just for now, we're going to keep it nice and central. Then all we're going to do is we're going to grip down the golf club, and a few things in setup. The base at your low point of the club is under your armpit here, under your lead arm, and that is where you're going to imagine this club bruising that ground. From here, the next thing you want to imagine is that your setup here isn't out of line. A lot of people have this lead shoulder quite high. I want you to feel like you're dropping it low, so you're trying to line the entire body up. So you imagine almost 3 dots here. 1 dot on the top of your sternum, another dot in the middle, the lower part of your sternum, and then a dot on the ground. You want to try and get those lined up, because if they're not, it's going to start to create a very wristy style action. So we're going to get all those lined up here so we can improve the consistency of where this base or the bounce starts to bruise into the ground. So let's have another look at this. So armpits there, all my dots are starting to line up, and all I'm focusing on here, my intention by the way, is to strike the ground. I'm not trying to strike the golf ball in any shape or form here. Really crisp, nice motions here. I can, and if I showed you now as we do this, I'm going to show you me hitting a fat shot. Okay, so let's have a look at this fat shot. I'm going to strike, you classic traditionally fat. I'm going to strike the ground, look, way behind here. Let's have a look at the difference when I do this. So I purposely, struck that, look, a good 3 or 4 inches behind the golf ball, and I'm still up there. Yeah, so yes, I wouldn't advise that, but look, it means that your bad shots are so much more forgiving. If I did that with that leading edge coming down, I'm probably going to leave it in front of my nose. So that's the first thing. So we've talked the intention to strike the ground. The second thing is getting your setup completely lined up. And then it's a case of, look, there are so many different actions on tour. You've got some people using a lot of wrists and they're swinging through. Some people aren't using wrists at all. Doesn't matter, because you can do it in any style that you want. The key is that the intention here is always to get that bounce working. Look, can I use the bounce using lots of wrist? Yeah, no problem at all. I like that method. I use that on the golf course. Could I be more like a Steve Stricker where I don't use any wrist at all and do the same thing? Absolutely right. I'm using a lot more body in this motion. That's fine too. The key though is the principle of chipping, which is to get the bounce working, always holds firm. So what would I advise most people, or people when they're struggling? Keeping it really simple. I personally love this motion here where any time I get someone chipping one-handed, they always chip better, always chip better. Literally, if you haven't tried it, go and chip one-handed initially as a drill. You'll be amazed at how simple chipping is one-handed. It's one of the simplest ways of getting this bounce working every single time, because when the lead hand isn't on the golf club, you can't drive that handle forward. When this trail hand is doing a lot more of the work, you can see here, look, the shaft now is going a lot more vertical through the impact area. So certainly try that if you can. could make a massive difference. Let's have another look at this in action. So I want you to look at now this finished position here so that you can work on how you then start to transfer this motion into two hands. Look at how I finished here. Look at where the butt is and look at where the club is. The club has comfortably passed this butt end. What it hasn't done, which I see with so many golfers trying to chip, keeping their hands ahead. The more you start to try and create this type of motion, the more that leading edge is going to dig in, yeah? And we're not really then focusing on the ground. So look at this. If I'm trying to glide that club, I'm going to return that shaft to a nice neutral position here, nice and vertical here. Then what happens after that, I'm just allowing the club look to flow through towards my target, just as if, look, if I was grabbing a ball here and throwing a ball, look what I'm doing here. I'm allowing this just to go backwards and forwards, just throwing this ball. Same here, look at this, throwing motion, just literally allowing it to go. Now, look at the variance, as we've just mentioned, with the different swings. You see some of the players who like to get backspin on their chip shots, they'll allow a lot more wrist hinge, because when they unleash those wrists, it creates more speed and therefore more spin. But obviously that can be quite risky sometimes, because it means in order to time this motion, i.e. Getting this club shaft to neutral, for some people that can feel like too much. So then you've got the guys who actually, like I said, they're happy just to have a little bit less spin, but have a bit more control with this motion. But the principle remains the same. They are still allowing this club to naturally release through and ground through that shot. Now, left hand on my lead hand comes on the golf club here, and sometimes we then have problems. Why? Because again, it can drive, it can get it going through. So you've got to start to educate what this lead hand does. And for me, what I would do is just start to practice this lead hand, just staying quite close to the lead leg as it's coming through. Just see, I almost let the trail hand here guide where this lead hand needs to finish. So just imagine you're throwing it through, stop, put your lead hand in, feel where it needs to be, and then away we go. And look at this here, look, my lead hand right in my pocket. And I've done this before. I've often said to some of my students, imagine swinging with the butt. Pocket to pocket is sometimes a really, really nice image to focus on. And that's how we transfer this whole motion. But let's have a look, just to finish off, with a slightly more difficult lie and see how we can then expand this. Right, come and take a look at this lie. So what I've done here is I've really buried us in here. So what alterations do you need to make when you're in a lie like this or on the edges of the green? You still want to get up and down. Well, look, the first thing I would do is look, I've chosen a 56 degree sandwich here. All I would say is, look, when you're in the rough, maybe take some loft. You need loft to get it out. That's the first thing. But you know what? The second thing is we're then going to focus on what type of ground contact do we need. Again, not ball contact, ground contact. And what we're going to do is the ground contact that we need here is going to be slightly different. Whereas we could glide on a good lie, when you're on slightly dodgy lies, you now need to go more into the ground. So notice this, but I'm still going to go into the ground with the bounce. So because what I want to get, look, is this. As opposed to this glide, which will then catch all the rough behind, we're going to get the bounce going into the ground, so it creates more of a V-shaped swing. So the club goes bounce and starts to pop the ball more vertically. That's the intention, but we need to be prepared to set up slightly differently for that. We're going to push the ball a little bit further forward in a stance, maybe again just off our left heel, or lead heel here. And then the other thing I'm going to do, when you ever want more elevation, we can't have the shaft too vertical, so we're going to lower the shaft down. I said to you at the start, didn't I? You have to add variety when you want to make loft, when you want to have different shots around the green. This is the variety. So we've got the ball further forward, we've got the shaft further down, and we've chosen more loft. Now, all I'm then going to do is I'm going to set my intention to strike the ground behind the golf ball with the bounce in a more doof way. Like I'm trying to create this boof, boof. As opposed to gliding it, I'm going to go into the turf a bit more. Now it won't be fat, why? Because I'm not going into the turf with the leading edge, I'm going into with the blunt bit. So watch this. So I'm going to lower the shaft down a little bit, it helps me to add a little bit of loft, and my intention is to come more into the ground. Now we said earlier, well, what technique, how do I do that? What technique do I use? Well, do we use a no-risk motion? If you use a no-risk motion, you might feel that's fine. You can do that too. You might have to put more weight on your lead side to create an action that goes more up and down, yeah, because that's what you're going to need. If you are somebody who likes the feeling of maybe using a bit more wrist, well, you probably won't need as much lean forward. You can start to get the club working more vertically up and more vertically down. It doesn't matter which way you do it, because the intention is still the same. There's many ways to skin a cat, as they say. At the end of the day, all we're going to try and do is as long as the intention is to strike the ground behind the golf ball, that is all you're focusing on. So that's all I'm doing here. So I get myself set. I'm just going to pop this one up onto the green. Hey presto. Gears must just run away a little bit, but out of that lie, that's pretty good. Just gives me a nice uphill putt for par. And do you see how the ball popped up in the air? Look at the mark that I've created. This is no glide now. This is actually a shot where I've actually gone into the turf to pop the ball up in the air. The contact, by the way, can feel a little bit fat. And that's just something we have to get used to. We're so used to trying to get pure contact with the ball that a lot of these shots around the green can feel a bit what you call strange, because they're not always attractive, because we're not actually directly striking the golf ball. So look, that is it for now. There's lots more on the short game. I'll put a playlist actually of all the different short game lessons that I've done on YouTube down in the description box below, so I've added more to this. But just for now, let's summarize. Stage number 1, do not make the mistake of making the golf ball your target. Start to work on how your club interacts with the ground. How to interact on good lies? Well, just interact with a gliding effect. On bad lies, maybe go for a bit more of a thud effect, going into the turf a little bit more with the flat base of your golf club. Then, in terms of setup, how do we make this a little bit easier? Well, you can get the stance nice and narrow. You could make sure that your posture here is directly in line. We're not out of line here, so you want to imagine there's your sternum here, top of your sternum, and the bottom of the sternum are all lined up down towards the ground. They're not creating this curve. So nice, simple motions. The second thing here, remember, the low point under your lead armpit here. That's the low point of this club here. If that moves around, you're going to move around. It's going to be hard to repeat this on a regular basis, okay? What technique do you use? Do you use a wristy motion? Do you have no wrist? Do you know what? Whatever you feel comfortable doing. Like I said, one of my favorite exercises is the one-handed exercise here. You could imagine just throwing balls onto the green here. And this is not the best of lies, but all I'm going to do here, look at this here, one-handed motion, just literally throw it onto the green. Get the feel of this working. You'll be amazed at how simple this is. Look at that there, it's just so accurate. Once you've done that once or twice, what you can do is you can then start to educate yourself. Well, if I did that one-handed, where would my lead hand be now? Okay, then start to add the lead hand in very, very lightly until you start to get it. And really, it's just as simple as that. You know, work on these motions. Yes, it's tricky. The anxiety, by the way, will start to disappear once you realize, you know what? You can hit the ground. Remember that shot that I hit where I hit miles behind the ball. It wasn't the best of ship shots, but you know what? It was still 8-9 feet away, which gives us a chance rather than leaving it in front of our nose. So I really hope you enjoy this training. Remember, you don't have to remember a thing. There's a practice guide in the description box below. But until next week, everybody, if you're new to the channel, press that subscribe button and the bell so I can give you some more content next week. Maybe give it a thumbs up and share it with one of your friends. But until next week, have a wonderful golfing week.